On a crisp spring morning in Milan, the air was filled with the promise of a new day for the bustling city. It was March 27, 1995, and the streets were alive with the sound of traffic and pedestrians making their way to work. Outside an elegant office building on Via Palestro, a well-dressed man ascended the stone steps with the confidence of a titan of industry. He was Maurizio Gucci, the heir to one of the most famous fashion dynasties in the world. Suddenly, the sharp crack of gunshots shattered the morning calm. The man collapsed to the ground as blood stained the pristine entrance. In a matter of seconds, the last of the Gucci family to run the legendary empire lay dead. The murder of Maurizio Gucci sent shockwaves through the fashion world and high society across the globe. This was not merely a random act of violence on the streets of Italy, but a targeted assassination of a public figure. The name Gucci was synonymous with luxury and style and wealth, yet behind the double G logo lay a dark history of family feuds and betrayal. Investigators arriving at the scene were immediately confronted with a puzzle that seemed to have too many pieces. Maurizio had many enemies, ranging from scorned business partners to jealous relatives. But as the police peeled back the layers of his life, they would uncover a story more twisted than any fiction. To understand the tragedy of the end, we must look back to the humble beginnings of the dynasty. The story began not in a boardroom, but in the elevators of the Savoy Hotel in London at the turn of the 20th century. A young Italian man named Guccio Gucci worked there as a lift boy transporting the luggage of the European aristocracy. He became mesmerized by the quality of their travel gear and the elegance of their leather trunks. Guccio observed the wealthy guests closely and absorbed their tastes and their appreciation for fine craftsmanship. He returned to his native Florence with a singular vision to create leather goods that combined English nobility with Italian artistry. In 1921, Guccio opened his first shop in Florence selling imported leather luggage and goods made by local artisans. The shop was a small establishment, but it quickly gained a reputation for impeccable quality. The scent of tanned leather and the sight of meticulous stitching drew in the local elite. Guccio was a demanding patriarch who insisted on perfection from his workers and his family. As his sons Aldo and Vasco and Rodolfo grew up, they were brought into the business and taught that the family name was their most valuable asset. The seed of the empire was planted in the fertile soil of Tuscan craftsmanship, but the roots of conflict were also taking hold. The brand survived the hardships of World War II and shortages of materials by innovating with hemp and bamboo. It was during this difficult era that the iconic bamboo handle bag was born, becoming a symbol of resilience and style. After the war, the sons of Guccio pushed for expansion beyond the borders of Italy. Aldo Gucci, the eldest and most ambitious son, saw the potential of the American market. Against the initial hesitation of his father, Aldo opened the first Gucci boutique in New York City. This move transformed the company from a local Florentine business into an international status symbol. The American dream was now dressed in Italian leather. By the 1960s and 70s, Gucci had entered its golden age. The brand became the uniform of the jet set and Hollywood royalty. Grace Kelly and Jackie Kennedy and Elizabeth Taylor were frequently photographed carrying Gucci bags or wearing their loafers. The double G logo became a global shorthand for sophistication and wealth. However, as the profits soared, so did the tensions within the family. The brothers Aldo and Rodolfo controlled the company, but their management styles were vastly different. Aldo was the aggressive businessman, while Rodolfo was a former actor who preferred the creative and romantic side of the brand. The friction between the brothers began to create cracks in the foundation. Into this atmosphere of high stakes and family tension stepped the third generation. Paolo Gucci, the son of Aldo, and Maurizio Gucci, the son of Rodolfo, were cousins with little in common. Paolo was eccentric and desperate to design his own line, but was constantly shut down by his father and uncle. Maurizio, on the other hand, was quiet and studious, and initially had little interest in the family business. He studied law and preferred to stay out of the limelight. But destiny and family obligation have a way of pulling people back in. When Rodolfo died, Maurizio would inherit 50% of the company and find himself thrust into a war he was not prepared for. The conflict escalated when Maurizio met a vibrant and ambitious woman named Patrizia Reggiani at a party in Milan. Patrizia was not from the same aristocratic circles as the Guccis. Her father was in the trucking business, and she was often viewed by the elite as new money. However, her charm and violet eyes captivated the shy Maurizio. He fell deeply in love, seeing in her the strength and confidence he felt he lacked. When he announced his intention to marry her, his father, Rodolfo, was furious. Rodolfo called Patrizia a social climber who was only after the Gucci money, and he threatened to disinherit Maurizio if the wedding went ahead. Defying his father for the first time in his life, Maurizio packed his bags and left the family home. He moved in with the Reggiani family and married Patrizia in 1972. For a few years, the couple lived a happy life away from the pressure of the Gucci empire. Patrizia was a devoted wife and pushed Maurizio to reconcile with his father before it was too late. Eventually, the birth of their daughters softened the heart of Rodolfo. The father and son reunited, and Maurizio and Patrizia were welcomed back into the fold. It seemed like a fairy tale ending, but the ambition of Patrizia was just beginning to stir. With the death of Rodolfo in 1983, Maurizio inherited his majority stake in the company. Now he was no longer the quiet law student, but the chairman of Gucci. Patrizia saw herself as the queen of this empire. She began to insert herself into business meetings and advise Maurizio on strategy. She enjoyed the lavish lifestyle that came with the position, spending thousands on orchids and parties and real estate. But Maurizio wanted to prove he could run the company on his own. He began to resent the interference of his wife and the constant pressure from his cousins, who were fighting him for control. The family war turned legal and vicious. Aldo Gucci, who had built the brand in America, was accused of tax evasion. In a shocking betrayal, it was revealed that his own family members had aided in exposing his financial secrets to the authorities. Aldo was sent to prison at the age of 81, a humiliation that stained the family legacy. Maurizio used this opportunity to consolidate his power, buying out his cousins with the help of an investment bank called Investcorp. For the first time, one man controlled the entire Gucci empire. But winning the war for control did not mean Maurizio knew how to rule the kingdom. Under the leadership of Maurizio, the company began to struggle. He made decisions that alienated longtime employees and caused profits to plummet. He spent money recklessly on renovating palaces and buying a historic sailing yacht called the Creole. The finances of the company were bleeding red ink. Patrizia watched with growing horror as the fortune she loved was jeopardized by what she saw as the incompetence of her husband. Her criticism became harsh and constant. She called him a failure and a weakling. The love that had once defied a father had turned into a toxic brew of resentment and disappointment. One day in 1985, Maurizio told Patrizia he was going on a short business trip to Florence. He never returned. He sent a friend to tell her that the marriage was over. Patrizia was devastated and humiliated. She had lost her husband, but more importantly, she was losing her status as Mrs. Gucci. Maurizio began a relationship with a childhood friend named Paola Franchi. Paola was tall and blonde, and everything Patrizia was not. The jealousy consumed Patrizia. She told anyone who would listen that she wanted Maurizio dead. She asked her lawyer and her grocer, and her maid if they knew someone who could kill her husband. By 1993, the financial situation at Gucci was dire. Maurizio was forced to sell his remaining 50% stake to Investcorp, ending the family ownership of the brand entirely. He walked away with over $100 million, but he had lost the company his grandfather built. For Patrizia, this was the ultimate betrayal. She felt that he had stolen the birthright of their daughters. In her mind, the name Gucci belonged to her more than it did to him. She continued to use the name, and famously declared that she would rather weep in a Rolls-Royce than be happy on a bicycle. Patrizia found a confidant in a woman named Pina Orima, a self-styled psychic and socialite. Pina became the constant companion of Patrizia, listening to her rage and feeding her paranoia. The two women spent hours discussing how to solve the problem of Maurizio. Patrizia was terrified that Maurizio would marry Paola Franchi, which would cut her alimony in half and displace her as the matriarch. The conversations shifted from venting anger to plotting action. Pina claimed she had connections in the criminal underworld. A plan began to form in the shadows of their high society life. The conspiracy involved a motel porter named Ivano Saviani and a pizzeria owner named Benedetto Serrallo. It was a motley crew of amateurs for such a high-profile hit. They agreed on a price of roughly 600 million lira, which was about $375,000 at the time. Patrizia was the financier and the architect. She wanted Maurizio gone before his wedding to Paola could take place. The date was set. The location was scouted. The tragedy was set in motion by a woman who could not let go of her obsession with power and status. Returning to that morning on Via Palestro, the hitman Benedetto Serrallo waited for Maurizio. As the businessman walked up the steps, Serrallo fired 3 shots into his back and 1 fatal shot to the temple. The doorman Giuseppe Onorato was also shot in the arm, but survived to be the only eyewitness. The killer fled in a getaway car, leaving Maurizio dead in the foyer. The police were initially baffled. They investigated the business dealings of Maurizio, suspecting the mafia or angry investors. The idea that his former wife had orchestrated the hit seemed too obvious, yet too clumsy to be true. Patrizia moved quickly to assert her dominance. Less than 24 hours after the murder, she sent an eviction notice to Paola Franchi, demanding she leave the apartment she shared with Maurizio. Patrizia moved in with her daughters and resumed her life as the lady of the house. She wrote a single word in her diary on the day of the murder: Paradisos. It is the Greek word for paradise. She believed she had won. She thought she was untouchable. For 2 years, the investigation stalled. The police chased dead ends in Switzerland and the United States while Patrizia lived freely in Milan. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In January 1997, the police received a tip from an informant who had overheard the night porter Ivano Saviani bragging about the murder. The police set up wiretaps and surveillance. They listened as Patrizia and Pina discussed the payment and the details of the crime. The arrogance of the conspirators was their downfall. They believed they had committed the perfect crime, but they were talking about it on open lines. The evidence mounted until the prosecutor felt he had enough to make an arrest. On a rainy morning in 1997, the police arrived at the door of Patrizia Reggiani. She was prepared for the cameras. She wore a full-length mink coat and gold jewelry and dark sunglasses. She demanded to be allowed to bring her jewelry and handbags to prison. The press dubbed her the Black Widow. The arrest shocked the nation. The woman who had once been the darling of the tabloids was now accused of the most cold-blooded crime imaginable. Along with her, the police arrested Pina Orima, the hitman, and the driver. The entire network of the conspiracy was dragged into the light. The trial was a media circus that captivated Italy. Patrizia maintained her innocence, claiming that Pina Orma had set her up and blackmailed her. Her defense team tried to argue that a brain tumor she had surgery for years earlier had affected her judgment. They painted her as a victim of her own mental state. But the prosecution presented the diaries and the wiretaps and the testimony of her co-conspirators. Pina turned on Patrizia, testifying that the former Mrs. Gucci had been the driving force behind the murder. The image of the grieving widow crumbled to reveal a calculating mastermind. The courtroom was packed every day. Patrizia often arrived looking like she was attending a fashion show rather than a murder trial. She showed little remorse for the death of her former husband. She seemed more concerned with her lost status and money. The public was divided between those who saw her as a monster and those who saw her as a woman scorned. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated and returned a guilty verdict. Patrizia Reggiani was sentenced to 29 years in prison. The hitman was given a life sentence. Justice had finally arrived for Maurizio. Life in San Vittore prison was a stark contrast to the luxury Patrizia was used to, but she managed to adapt in her own way. She was allowed to keep a pet ferret in her cell for a time. She refused the first offer of work release in 2011, famously stating that she had never worked a day in her life and did not intend to start now. She preferred to stay in her cell rather than engage in common labor. Her arrogance remained intact even behind bars. She continued to refer to herself as a Gucci despite the family legally barring her from using the name. Patrizia was eventually released in 2016 after serving 18 years. She emerged back into a world that had moved on without her. The Gucci brand was now a global powerhouse under the ownership of Kering and the creative direction of new designers. Patrizia was seen walking the streets of Milan with a macaw on her shoulder, still seeking the attention of the paparazzi. When a reporter asked her why she hired a hitman instead of shooting Maurizio herself, she replied that her eyesight was not good and she did not want to miss. It was a chilling reminder of her lack of regret. The legacy of the Gucci family is a cautionary tale of how greed and ego can destroy even the strongest bonds. The brand itself rose from the ashes of the family immolation. In the 1990s, under the guidance of Tom Ford and Domenico de Sol, Gucci became the hottest fashion label in the world. They saved the company from bankruptcy and turned it into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. But they did it without a single person named Gucci in the building. The family had been entirely erased from the business they created. Today, the name Gucci represents high fashion and avant-garde style. But for those who know the history, it also represents a Shakespearean tragedy. It is a story of a father who built an empire and sons who fought over the spoils, and a grandson who was murdered by the woman he loved. The murder of Maurizio Gucci closed the final chapter of the family dynasty. The stone steps on Via Palestro have been cleaned, and the blood washed away, but the memory of that morning remains. It serves as a grim reminder that, while you can buy luxury, you cannot buy loyalty. The daughters of Maurizio and Patrizia, Alessandra and Allegra, inherited the fortune of their father. They have lived quiet lives away from the cameras, trying to escape the shadow of their mother. They cut ties with Patrizia after her release, engaging in legal battles over the estate. The cycle of money and legal fighting continued even into the next generation. The curse of the Gucci wealth seemed to linger long after the guns were silenced. The story remains one of the most compelling true crime sagas of the 20th century. As we look back at the glamour and the betrayal, we are left with a final thought. The ambition that drove Gucci to carry luggage in London was the same ambition that drove Patrizia Reggiani to plot a murder in Milan. It is a force that can build empires and destroy lives. The Gucci logo is recognized everywhere, but few see the ghosts hiding behind the double G. The House of Gucci stands tall, but the family that built it has fallen. And in the end, the price of the name was higher than anyone could have imagined.